Hey guys, what's up? It's Charlie here, and today we're going to be looking at the scary story of the real Ronald McDonald. We all know the character Ronald McDonald of McDonald's from our childhoods. But did you know the very scary story behind the real life version of this guy? In this video we're going to look at that and also 4 more very scary things that actually happened. But before we get too scared, why not subscribe and press the notification bell too? So first, let's look at the story of the real Ronald McDonald. Between the years 1991 and 1999, McDonald's used Ronald McDonald in every single one of their commercials. He was the mascot of McDonald's and kids either loved him or were terrified of him. Now, between the years 1991 to 1999, it was played by a guy named Bruce Jack Doffey. But a couple of times there were stand-in actors when Bruce couldn't do it. One of these guys was David Hussey, but he was pretty normal. The guy we're going to look at is called Joe Maggard. Joe Maggard was a lightings operator on various sets of movies and TV shows. And a few times when Bruce couldn't portray Ronald McDonald, he would do it instead. But in around 1995, that's when Joe Maggard began acting very strangely. At first he called all of the media and said he was taking over the character. He said Bruce would no longer play it and instead he would. But this turned out to be totally false. He was just a stand-in for 2 commercials. In 1998, Joe began phoning people and scaring them. He would talk in the manner of a clown, kind of like he did in the Ronald McDonald adverts. But instead of mentioning burgers and fries, he would threaten these people over the phone. Later on that year, he was charged by a policeman for carrying a weapon. And later that year, he was caught again for harassing people pretending to be Ronald McDonald. He wasn't sentenced to any jail time, but he did have to take mandatory anger management classes. He even appeared in a documentary named Ronald. In this, he says he's now retired from playing Ronald McDonald. But he said he was still playing the character up to 2007, despite the fact that McDonald stopped using the character in 1999. I can't believe the Ronald McDonald stand-in was actually making scary phone calls to people. It's also very weird he lied about being the main actor for Ronald McDonald for so many years. Today he's 63 years old and who knows what Joe's doing, but his story sure is scary and interesting. The next scary story on this list we have to look at is the phone stalker. Have you ever got a mysterious phone call that just didn't seem right? Maybe you picked up the phone, heard breathing, and then the call ended. Or maybe you got a call from someone you don't know who knows just too much about you. Well, in 2007, a few families got a series of very scary phone calls. The caller wouldn't identify themselves, but he knew exactly what the families were doing and what they were wearing. So this guy was clearly somehow watching these families he was calling, but they didn't know where he was or who he was. Not only that, in the calls the guy said he would take the families' lives. The calls would always happen at night, but could happen at any hour. It might be 8 PM or 4 AM. In the calls, they said they would take the children's lives or their pets' lives. And what's even more strange is, somehow the caller knew the names of their kids, their pets, and even their grandparents. Once they even called a policeman, but later that night they got an anonymous voicemail of that very same phone call. So clearly the scary caller was also wiretapping these families. One family named the Kunikal family had these calls for months. Police listened to these calls live to make sure that no one they knew was just making them up. They heard a scratchy-voiced man saying awful things about the family. Eventually, police were able to trace the call, but it traced back to their very own phone they were using. Obviously, this literally made no sense, and it even traced back to their phone when it was turned off. Now, the families no longer get these calls, but to this day, they still don't know who was behind these calls. Maybe it was a whole team of people. And the most popular theory is they were somehow tracking them using their cell phones. How else would they know exactly where they were, where they'd been, and what they were wearing? Also, how else would the callers record their private phone calls? But how would this very scary caller be able to hack their cell phone's cameras, locations, and calls? And not only that, why were they doing it? The caller never followed through on any of the threats and never harmed the families physically. But just imagine how scary it would be having this phone stalker harass you all the time. The next thing we're going to look at is called Unit 731. We all know that World War II brought out the worst in scientists. There were terrible human experiments happening all the time, but you may think the worst of these experiments would take place in Germany. But no, it actually took place in Japan. Everyone knows Chinese people were treated terribly by Imperial Japan during WW2. But nothing was worse than what happened in a place named Unit 731. This was a Japanese bio-war unit. and it was a place where the worst human experiments in history were conducted. One of these experiments was called the frostbite test. This was where a person was taken into a freezing cold room and left there 24/7. This person would then stay in this room until they had ice forming over their skin. They also carried out various surgeries on people to see their insides. They did this while the people were alive and with no anesthetics. That's because they thought if they used someone who'd already passed on, their experiments may be affected. Also, they didn't hold back on who they did this to. They would experiment on men, women, and even children. In Unit 731, they'd also experiment with germ warfare. This was basically giving people very dangerous diseases to see what would happen to them. During the years 1937 to 1945, over 3,000 people passed away in Unit 731. And it's really crazy to think some of this stuff was happening when our grandparents were alive. It really goes to show what can happen when bad people go unchecked. Next up, we have the story of Italian zombies. You may think that zombies are only in movies, right? Well, think again, because they really did exist in Italy. Well, kind of. Now, we all know what high resistance was in Italy. It's a period in art production in Italy consisting of Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. But not every Italian at the time was admiring these amazing works of art. In 1494 in Italy, there was an outbreak of syphilis. Because there was no cure for this caused people's face to rot away. That's right, people who got this had their flesh fall off within a few months. Now, these people were still living, but they didn't have any lips or noses. So these were literally people who were walking around as zombies. It wasn't uncommon at the time to see a bunch of people walking around with their faces completely falling off. So while you may be admiring some amazing art, you also had to see zombies if you lived at the time of high resistance. And the final scary thing on this list we're going to look at is called the Dancing Plague. The Dancing Plague took place in 1518 in now modern day France. One day in July, over 400 people began dancing, but the weird thing is, there was no music and they would not stop. These people danced for around 1 month. Many of these people actually passed away from a heart attack, stroke, or exhaustion. That's because they just danced and never stopped to eat, drink, talk, or sleep. Up until today, this is a complete mystery as to why this happened. The most popular theory is this was caused by food poisoning. Ergot fungi could have grown on some of the wheat they were eating at the time. This would have caused an acid-like effect and would have made people freak out. Others say this could have been an event of mass hysteria. This is where, seemingly for no reason, a group of people in an area go absolutely crazy. But as I say, the most popular theory is food poisoning caused by a psychoactive chemical. This is most likely the case, as back then they didn't used to wash their food before eating it. But it's still a very scary and mysterious historical story. So guys, those were 5 very scary stories from history and the modern day. Use the poll in the top right corner to vote for the scariest story on this list. Personally, I think it's Unit 731, as that is beyond terrifying. If you guys want some more light-hearted videos, then check out my second channel. There'll be a link to that coming up on screen in a moment. But as always, thanks for watching. Check out some more videos on screen right now, leave a like if you enjoyed, and if you haven't already, what are you waiting for? Subscribe to Top 10s.